This is Talk Over Tea,
a place for a casual conversation about life and local government.
with Kassandra
and Claudel Frederic.
elected officials from the city of Amesbury, Massachusetts.
Relax with us for a moment. The tea is hot.
All right. Hey, we are back, huh?
We are back.
Yes.
Hi, Claudel.
How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Not bad. Busy week or okay week?
Always very scheduled.
Very scheduled, but
Yes.
I feel like it makes the week go by really quick when you know you have things back to back to back.
Always
Yeah.
exciting things.
Good.
Yeah. So welcome back, everybody.
Yes.
We're here for Talk Over Tea. And I'm excited today to ask Claudel questions about city council. And I think these are questions that lots of people have.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I know I had these questions, and some things I'm still going through and learning them as we go along too. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to kind of chat about them as well.
How long have you been on city council for everybody listening?
I'd say it's been about like 10 months.
Yeah, as
10
of
or
our
9? Yeah.
as of our recording date here.
Yeah.
10 months. So
Yeah,
you're in your first
exactly.
year as a city councilor.
Correct.
Yep. And learned a lot since you started, I'm sure. We're going to just like break down the basics though today. Yeah, sort of, which is a lot of the learning curve. When you sort of step in, if you've never been a city councilor, you don't, there's no other way to
Yeah.
learn what it's like to be a city councilor, right?
Yeah, you get tossed right in. So you learn. Yeah.
Awesome. So my first question for you is just about the process of sort of dealing with your business. So you, for the most part, process city council bills, and they can take different forms. But what is that process like? Where does it start? Who writes a council bill?
So as far as who writes it, council bills can come from either administration. It could come from a council member, or it could come directly from a constituent, assisted by
A counselor.
a counselor.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've learned as I've been in office is that the more co-sponsors
Yeah.
you have on one of those bills, the more likely it is to be successsual.
Yes,
right.
that
So
makes sense.
in your experience, have you filed bills or seen people working together to file bills and have
Yeah.
thoughts on that? And,
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're working on a bill, like say if I'm putting something forward and I know there's other, counselors that are also interested in the same topic or whatever it may be that I'm putting together, I think it's always a great idea to get some co-sponsors. Like you said, it helps carry the bill through, helping it pass, the chances of it pass.
Yeah, you get
It's
different
definitely-
perspectives and
Exactly.
draft. The draft is a better product, right?
Yeah.
When it gets introduced. So
Exactly.
so people work together, and so when I, as the administration, introduce council bills, they're not always something that I wrote. They could come from my staff, and then I have to be the one to sign it. But I think when the public sees it, has my name on it, it's like always from the mayor,
Right.
but sometimes it's from the staff and could be, introduced for a variety of reasons. So we get a council bill, and we write the council bill. They could take all different forms. There's like 3 or 4 different things that we can file, and we'll talk about that after. But what do people do with it? How do we get that council bill to you for business?
As far as filing the
Yeah.
council bill, well, it has to be submitted to the clerk's office. And the timeline on that, everything has a timeline.
Yep.
So,
It's like very
yeah,
predictable, right?
exactly.
We
Everything
live
has
on a schedule
timeline.
that no one else
Yes.
follows.
and this is part of the reason why municipal government kind of moves at a slower pace.
Yeah.
So in order to file something that we want to see come to fruition, we have to get it out to the clerk's office 8 calendar days before the next meeting. So we had to get it out to them, and then they'll put it on the agenda.
Yep.
If we miss that deadline, then it's considered a late file.
Yep.
So if there's something that is a late file, that would need to get acceptance by our city councilor president, our council president.
Yeah.
Either approve it or not approve it to be on that agenda.
Right.
So.
And then even if we get a late file in, council president says, sure, you can put it on the agenda. at the meeting where that is on the agenda as a late file, you actually take a vote about whether you even want to discuss it.
Exactly.
Right? So it could actually still be put off.
Right.
So that 8-day notification, 8-day filing prior to a council meeting is really important. So I know for our office, in my office at the mayor's office, our team has that filing deadline on our calendar already for the whole year. We know when filing deadline is, and so does our, the rest of our staff, the department heads. They know when their deadline is, and they can actually calendar out the rest of the sort of life of that bill, which we'll talk about. So if they want something approved by a certain date, they can back themselves into a schedule and know when they need to file by if they want to get that council bill approved.
Right.
And there's any time sensitivity to it,
Right.
because that's just the step one, right?
Yeah.
So we get it to the clerk.
That's just step one.
Right.
of
So we get it to
getting
the
filed,
clerk,
yeah.
and 8 days later, you have your first council meeting. How do you prepare for those meetings, or how do your fellow counselors, sort of like what happens in those 8 days before that first meeting, which is actually just a first reading?
Right.
So what does that mean for you?
The first reading.
Yeah.
So a first reading, there's no real discussion that takes place during a first reading. A first reading is exactly that. It's that piece of legislation. It's pretty much just read out to the public, and there's no discussion or votes that happen
Right.
on that first reading.
Yeah.
But that bill is available for the public to kind of see and do their own research as well,
Right.
just like we can.
Yeah. So once it's filed with the clerk,
yeah.
it gets put online and is
Correct.
public, like you said.
Correct.
So that's sort of like the notification to everyone.
Yes.
That this has been introduced. It's up for the council's consideration. The council can go out and read it, but that gets sort of it gets read into the record at that first council meeting.
Correct.
And so that's when we think sort of everyone's on alert, right? There's something out there to be considered. And then what happens after the first reading?
So within that first reading, these bills are usually referred to subcommittees. So subcommittees may specialize in different things. It may be ordinance. It may be a planning board. It might go to business and finance type of subcommittee. So you could review that bill. And once the subcommittees, different subcommittees review it, then at that point it will be ready or it'll get put back on the agenda.
Yeah.
For a second reading.
Okay. So
For
then
a
it goes
second
back
reading.
to city
Yeah,
council.
correct.
And so some of those committees that you mentioned, they're not all subcommittees of the council. Some of them are independent
Correct.
adjudicatory
Yes.
bodies who have their own schedules and their own submission deadlines, their own posting requirements. So that's where that schedule that I just mentioned, right, when we sort of schedule out the life of a bill, you have to really follow when that referral is going to happen and when it might get to that other board. So we'll use planning board for an example. We have a lot of bills that get referred to planning board that you guys work on, and oftentimes the council is waiting for the recommendation back from planning board before they will actually discuss it in a subcommittee. So what is that like for you? How does that? How could a member of the public sort of follow that? What does that look like in like public notices, or how can they follow?
As far so
Yeah.
they would basically have to follow that bill
Yeah.
pretty much to the subcommittees or pretty much wait till right now what we do is set a second reading right after the first reading
Yep.
is done. There's a date for a second reading that is set.
Yep.
So right now what happens is in that first meeting, we state that, hey, this is being referred to planning board.
Yep.
And it will be back here on such and such date for second reading.
Sure.
So at that point, somebody in the general public, they would write down that date.
Yeah, that's the important date.
Yeah, exactly. They'd be like, hey, based on this date, I'm going to come back and I'm going to get information. I'm going to speak on this, because that second reading is when you could
You can
the
talk.
public, you could talk. Yeah, we could discuss. The public can speak on the bill, and at that point, that's when they would show up.
Yeah.
So
So oftentimes that's the public hearing, and that's when they
Correct.
get to talk. And most of, and the deliberation, a lot of deliberation will happen with the council
correct
at that second reading.
at that second reading.
Yeah. So some of the sometimes what we see the public, engagement and the frustration of sort of trying to follow these council bills is, like I said, it's in these, after the first reading, it gets referred out to subcommittees or other committees, and everyone has their own timeline, and sometimes they're waiting on other people. So things get continued.
Correct.
They might get continued. It could be months that it gets continued. And for the public, it can be a lot of time out of their schedule to come to these meetings
Right.
and then sit there until it gets to that point in the agenda, and then they just hear that it's continued.
Right.
And we understand. I think we both empathize with the fact that that's frustrating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And but that sort of due diligence period, I'll call it, for the subcommittees to do their deliberating and do their research and call in experts is how the council is set up to have that like real in the weeds conversation happen in smaller groups and smaller committees, and then have all of that sort of funnel back up to the council at that second reading.
Yes.
So, I mean, we have some things, right? I've seen them take 6 months
Right.
to work through those subcommittees and referrals. And so,
I feel like we have something like that
Right.
happening now.
yeah. Yeah.
And I'd say, to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying, to think about the constituents, I do think it could be a little bit frustrating for them if, local government already, I don't know how exciting it is for a lot of these constituents, but when they are taking time out of their day to schedule something in and make it to a meeting, and then when it gets to the bill, they find out it's continued, and they pretty much were there for nothing almost. That's not a good feeling. I feel like it could discourage them.
Yeah.
So me as a new counselor going through this experience, in my mind, I feel like maybe that is not the most effective way to go about it with having a second date set. But this is just me going through this experience, realizing,
Right.
like, you think you're helping the constituents, but really, like, not many people are on the website every other day checking
Right.
to see if things got continued or not. So that first date we're giving them, they're holding us to it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And they're marking that in their calendar and planning to come back.
Marking
Yeah.
in their calendar.
And
Yeah.
I don't, I have limited experience and have sort of always seen it done this way in Amesbury, and it does sort of create that tension with the public. And it'd be interesting to see us try something different.
Right.
But I think, at this point, the best we can do and sort of why we're here is to
Right.
educate the public on, what is happening. And
The flow.
just as we're talking, I'm thinking about ways, the public could better navigate this. And we're just here to think out loud, right? I think it emphasizes the importance of constituents staying in touch with their counselors and asking them, hey, I have this date on my calendar. I'm following this bill.
Right.
Can you, keep me informed of where it's at? Or can you confirm that it's going to be discussed? I'm planning to be there on Tuesday. And their
Right.
counselor might say, no, we're really not planning to discuss it. Or, you could watch it online and learn everything that we're talking about, but there's no
Yeah.
public comment, or, they could help communicate what's really happening. And even going to the counselor who maybe sponsored the bill, if it's a counselor presented bill, they might be able to have a one-on-one conversation with that counselor. Maybe it's not your counselor, but you could talk to them about, what they know, why they introduced it, or maybe, why they're against it, or, you could actually maybe learn from them and help inform you about the process and where it's headed, and, what people are feeling about it, depending on what it is. So that might be an option too for people to learn more, and instead of, I feel like people just sort of like blindly show up and
Right.
And then again are frustrated when it's not discussed, or not on the agenda, or especially for first readings. One of the things I think we've helped people get beyond that, but we had a lot of people showing up for a while just for first readings when there is no comment, there is no discussion, there's no presentation, and that, and those are at the end of the agenda. They're the last things. So they're spending hours just sitting there until the end, and then there's nothing to talk about. So,
and I also think a good place for people to show up to is also the subcommittees.
Yep.
Not seeing that big of a turnout at the subcommittees, but I think that would also be a really good place for constituents to show up to kind of hear what's being spoken about for each bill.
Yeah. Well, that's where we said that's like, when the group is really getting into the weeds and learning about things, and there's experts there to answer questions and give presentations, and part of it is to cut down on how long our council meetings are, that they can be very long. And if we had that expert, presentation and in-depth conversation about every item at those council meetings, they would be tremendously long. Right. So there's got to be a level of trust in the subcommittees that they've done their work and they're making recommendations back to the council.
Yes.
And, then a decision can be made by the council as a whole. And other counselors can go to those subcommittees. They can watch and get those recordings and minutes and, talk to those folks. So
if not, there'll be a lot of repetition.
Yeah.
A lot of repetition.
Which we've experienced on the staff side. We've certainly, been through that. And for some things that we introduce, we feel it's necessary to go through that and repeat the presentation, at every, because different people are there at different meetings, and, it needs to be heard. And, so sometimes we do that. So that's sort of the life of a council bill, right? So we just kind of covered it. So you get first readings, subcommittees, we get your referral. You wait for all of those referrals to come back until you can funnel them back up to the council. You get your second reading with your public hearing.
Correct.
And then typically there's a vote, and it can pass or fail. We don't have a lot of things fail. Yep. Which is the work of the subcommittees to get it to, we redraft things, we, amend and change, and sometimes we rescind things. We actually take it back and say, because there are laws against, if something were to fail, there are laws about refiling the exact same thing within a certain time period.
Right, I believe
so sometimes we rescind to sort of, reserve our right to refile. Right. So that happens too. But so you get to that vote, and then it gets certified, and that's when I actually have a few days that I could veto something, which doesn't happen a whole lot either. We have a really good relationship with the council right now. So, so that's sort of the whole process. Can you tell us more about the documents that sort of establish that process? Like what has set up this environment that you work in, like the rules, the subcommittees, who's doing what, who's on them, how many people, like who created this whole thing?
So we do have a city charter. We have a city charter, and we also have council rules.
Yep.
And in addition to all that, we also have Mass General Law.
Right, which sometimes is just, what we're following.
Right, exactly.
I mean, we're always following the law, but sometimes that is, overrules everything else.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So there are guidelines of that we have to follow in certain open meeting laws. There's a lot of things that we do have to follow. And like to your point, or your question, those things is most importantly our charter, Mass General Law, and council rules.
Yeah.
That's what we follow. So that's basically like our Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for folks who are interested, those are
public.
I mean, Mass General Law is like a little harder to sift through, but the charter and the council rules are public.
Yeah. And they're straightforward.
Yeah.
It's just a lot.
It is a lot. You can read them on the city website. So if you're interested, if you're thinking about, running, if you want to just get more involved and follow things and see what's going on, you can go out and read those. But it actually, especially council rules, sets up, how you process your business, what subcommittees you have, how many people serve on them. And those rules are, how old are those rules? When do you review them?
So I believe the rules are every two.
Yep, at the start of every term.
At the start of every term. But I believe the charter is every 10 years.
I think so.
That's reviewed.
Yeah.
And there's a committee specifically for that.
Yeah. So the charter
review,
rules get
yeah.
updated more often, and
Yeah.
and those are more, I would say like responsive, like they're more flexible, right? They're,
Correct.
it's, you want to have the right subcommittees for just the types of bills that you're seeing, or the, the way that you handle business, or, the way you, the sort of interests of the counselors, right? Like you can make
Right.
those changes in a more timely manner than a 10-year review. You get to do it with the
Correct.
term. So
With the council.
yeah. So they're on different review cycles, but, so you've got sort of guiding documents. So, I think for the public, maybe it's reassuring to know that this is all sort of written out for us, right? Like
Right.
we have very predictive schedules and rules to follow, and it's just a framework for us to work within, and we have to, we have to make sure we can, we've got to make sense of all of it. There's a
Right.
lot there, but it's,
We got to play by the rules.
yeah, it's kind of hard to screw it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it does seem like, again, I think we've mentioned this before, where we talk about it not being complicated, just being complex. And
Yes.
this is exactly what it is.
That's a good description.
There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
A lot
There
of
are.
moving parts. So it's not like, all right, we're looking at this bill today and it should be ready next week. Unfortunately, that's not the way it is. And
Right.
maybe I should say, fortunately, that's not the way it is, because
Yeah.
there's due diligence being done behind
Yeah.
everything that's put forward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, people ask us all the time about things. Well, how long do you think that's going to take? And it's like, well, best case scenario, we can get
Yeah.
it done in 30 days. If we meet the filing deadline for the first meeting of the month, you meet twice a month. And then, you get a first reading at the first meeting of the month. They have a week of subcommittees, and then they have the second meeting of the month. But if you miss that first meeting of the month, you're kicked into the next month. So,
Correct.
again, we sort of live by that schedule because we are the two different divisions of government, and I don't control your schedule or the
Yeah.
way you process things. And if counselors decide they need more information, or those subcommittees are waiting for other groups,
right.
then it gets extended. And,
Right.
and we want you to have the information. We want to make good decisions. Again, sometimes it's not fully baked. We don't like the results, and we may rescind it. It might get denied. You might get a negative vote,
Right.
and that happens. That's the the value. That's the point of government
Right,
being set up the way that
exactly.
it is. That's why there's so many of us involved, and we have this checks and balances. So, but it is hard to give people a definitive of sort of when things happen.
No, there isn't a
because that's the
definitive-
democratic process, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what has been maybe like the biggest takeaway for you so far, having been on the outside, now sitting at
Right.
the table? Like, what's one of your observations or takeaways?
So kind of like what we mentioned already.
Yeah.
I feel like chasing down I didn't understand what it meant to chase down a bill.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? Or what it means as for a constituent, and like the level of transparency we try to have with our constituents about what we're doing. It's a lot, and I didn't realize like how much went into it.
Yeah.
And kind of just going through that process, I realized we kind of have to be, they're fragile. So we have to be careful about how we want to do
Yeah.
the business of counsel. For me, I feel like we could be a little bit more effective
Yeah.
in setting our dates, just because I don't like when people show up to a meeting and they do not have, like, they're there, but they're not getting what they wanted out of it because they heard a date and they showed up and nothing's happening for them. So for me, just kind of like a learning experience, I feel like that's something that maybe we could do a little bit different that would make it a little bit more effective and not discourage constituents.
Yeah.
But that's just how I'm seeing it on my end, kind of like thinking about when I was on the outside looking in.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. If we want them to
So-
be involved, we need to,
Right.
not discourage that participation and find ways to work on that communication.
Yeah.
So that's a good
They're holding us to a
observation. I like
high
that.
regards.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you said that date, so here's
Yep.
what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So-
it's, again, we live in this bubble of, following that schedule, and it's easy
Right.
to forget for the people who are not following it. So, that's good. There's always room for improvement. I love that.
Exactly. But I think we got a good thing going.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, hopefully that's helpful for folks. I think we did a pretty good job of covering sort of the basics. Maybe in another meeting we can take a sample agenda of some of the things on your plate. We could talk about what they really mean or what they look like when they're filed. We can talk about the difference. We just talked about council bills in general, but there are different types of bills. There's administrative orders, there's orders, and there's ordinances. And then every once in a while you file resolutions. Not as often, but you can have all different things on your plate in one agenda. And it's, you've got to be able to switch gears quick.
Yes.
So yeah, maybe we can cover that in another episode, but we had people asking about council. So hopefully this is informative.
Hopefully it was basic enough.
Yeah. And always leave us comments and reviews if you have more questions and topics you want us to cover. Remember, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube, and we hope you come back for more.